American, the man of bronze who became the greatest athlete of all time.
Roll the credits. This is Pocono Mountains Podcast. I'm Jim Hamill. We are making history on Pocono Television Network this month, a full-length feature film airing on the network featuring the very man for whom Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania is named. That iconic athlete, legendary for his Olympic prowess and ability to overcome adversity, who even helped found the National Football League as it is today. Jim Thorpe, All-American, starts Burt Lancaster, a star back in the 1950s when the movie first came out, and now PTN presents the film thanks to Mock Chunk Trust Company. This is a way for PTN to help keep the legacy of Jim Thorpe alive. And thankfully, we have a film historian and author from right here in the Poconos to share with us the significance of the movie and the man, Jim Thorpe. More on that in a bit. The Poconos is a year-round destination for millions. And with mountains, forests, lakes, and rivers, with iconic family resorts and historic downtowns, it's the perfect getaway for a weekend or an entire week. You can always find out more on PoconoMountains.com or watch PTN, the Pocono Television Network, streaming live 24/7. That's also at PoconoTelevision.com. Thanks for listening to Pocono Mountains Podcast. We'll have a new episode each week highlighting lots of the fun things you can experience while you're visiting the Poconos. Subscribe and leave a review and or comment on whatever platform you listen. Back to the episode now. Jim Thorpe, All-American, premieres on PTN this coming Sunday, February 6th at 8 p.m. We're going to have 2 more showings after that, and we wanted to get an expert to share with us what the film is all about. John DeLeo does a weekly series at the historic Milford Theater, another one of the Poconos' great downtown gems. He was gracious enough to chat with us ahead of the premiere of Jim Thorpe, All-American, this Sunday. Welcome to Pocono Mountains Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jim Hamill, here for Pocono Television Network, and we have a very exciting guest on the episode today, talking about a very exciting feature film we're going to air on Pocono Television Network starting on February 6th at 8 p.m. That's Sunday, February 6th, 8 p.m. Jim Thorpe, All-American, the 1951 classic film starring Burt Lancaster. And joining us today on the podcast is John DeLeo of Milford, Pennsylvania. He is both an author and a film historian, and he speaks to folks in attendance at the Milford Theater weekly, John, right? You get out there and you talk to them about all the nuances and backstories about all these films that they show at that theater. So we wanted to welcome you to the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm every Sunday at 4 at the Milford Theater, I'll be introducing a classic movie for about 15 minutes. Then we all watch the movie in all its glory on the big screen. Some are black and white, some are color, some are widescreen, but they all look spectacularly beautiful. And then after the movie, I get back on stage and we have a Q&A that goes until we're done. And we just finished our Alfred Hitchcock series. We did 4 Hitchcock classics, 4 Sundays. And now a Sidney Poitier tribute this coming Sunday with To Sir With Love. And then we'll do romantic movies for the month of February for Valentine's Day.
Oh, and I know that space, we talked to Beth, the director of that theater, back on episode 32 of the podcast, and that has undergone a major transformation, a major upgrade there to the facility. It's a historic theater, but now it's got new seating, new sound and lighting, and just everything else there makes that such a even better experience for film watchers there at the theater, right?
Absolutely. The theater's over 100 years old, and it had fallen on hard times. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
We would still have events there, but it was getting a little shabby. Anyway, it's had this incredible refurbishment in the last year, reopened in October. And so you're right. It's this historic place with all this rustic charm, but everything else about it's state of the art. So it's really kind of an amazing place. And for me too, I live here. I can walk to the theater, introduce a movie. It's like, is this really happening?
for somebody who has your expertise and obviously your love of cinema, that must be the perfect fit then to just have that in town in Milford.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll transition from Milford to Jim Thorpe. We obviously at Pocono Television Network wanted to show this classic film from Warner Brothers due to the fact that the wonderful destination town named for Jim Thorpe, even houses his remains at a shrine there for Jim Thorpe, the legendary athlete of the 20th century who, medaled in the Olympics. He helped found the NFL, and it couldn't be more timely as we're looking forward to the Super Bowl and obviously the Winter Olympics getting started. So we wanted to, again, keep that memory alive of the man, the legend, and the athlete who obviously faced a lot of adversity in his life. And maybe you could speak a little bit to the film and what that provides people a glimpse to as far as who Jim Thorpe was and what he faced throughout his lifetime.
Well, so much of what they call biopics, the biographical films, follow a formula. They have since the talkies came in, and there was that, the rise, the sort of fall, and then the redemption. It's the arc of a biopic. Because if you had a completely happy life, no matter how famous you are, nobody wants to see your story because there's nothing to dramatize. So as you said, there's a lot in the Jim Thorpe story. And one thing I wanted to mention, just sort of behind the scenes about it, is the director of the movie is Michael Curtiz, which is not exactly a name as famous as Alfred Hitchcock, but Michael Curtiz is the man who directed Casablanca and White Christmas. So those are two movies that probably everyone watching this or listening has seen many, many times. And this is a man who, he really made a lot of movies, all different genres. And this is just another movie. He also directed Yankee Doodle Dandy, which is another biopic.
Right.
Of course, there's no singing and dancing in Jim Thorpe, but he really was an expert in the sense that you could give him any genre and he could make that movie, where some people were so specialized in what they did. And that's probably why he's not a household name as a director, because you can't pin him down the way you can with Hitchcock, Master of Suspense. Right. So Curtiz could do it all, and he usually, his direction's very unshowy. It's never about, look at me, I'm a brilliant man, focused on the story. And of course, I want to mention about Burt Lancaster, because he became a star in his first movie, 1946, so 5 years before this film, The Killers. And so he's a star when he plays Jim Thorpe, but 2 years later comes From Here to Eternity with Frank Sinatra and Deborah Carr, and that makes him a superstar. So he's he's not quite a superstar or as big as he would become, and he won the Oscar for Elmer Gantry in 1960, but he's a name, just not as big a name as he would become. And the interesting thing about casting him as Jim Thorpe, because sometimes those old biopics or even new biopics, you think, really, that's who you're going to use for that? It doesn't work. Right. But he was athletic. He had a background in acrobatics. He usually did all his own stunts. So if you're going to cast someone as a famous athlete, he had the physical prowess, the gracefulness, the agility. So maybe ethnically he didn't have the same background, but as a specimen, if you will, he was kind of ideal for that time in this kind of picture. So
that was something. Typecasting. And
I was going to say, so if you're watching the movie and thinking, why Burt Lancaster, I think that's the answer.
That makes a lot of sense then. And of course, he was one of those big stars of the silver screen, right, throughout that era. Yes. So, pairing him both with that athlete, who had the rise, the fall, the redemption, and all that kind of stuff. I think, that gravitas that he brings to the screen definitely probably translates for viewers even here in 2022.
Yeah, I think so. And this, the centerpiece of the movie is, of course, the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, where he wins. But what's interesting for Olympics aficionados is that in the movie, he goes back in 1932 to the LA Olympics, I believe as a spectator. But what's interesting is there's a lot of footage in this movie of the actual opening ceremony of LA in 1932. So I've said, if you're a real Olympics buff, there's a lot of priceless footage that wasn't that old when they made the movie that's incorporated. Now, there are probably other places you could see this stuff, but it's kind of handy that it's right there.
And, the world will be captivated by the upcoming Winter Games, so that's obviously timely as well. And to think that, this gentleman who, came from, the Sac and Fox reservation down in Oklahoma. I think that they were, certainly impoverished in that time and in that region. But then, his athleticism led him to the world stage, and then he faced the adversity of even, the iconic story of having to compete with two different size shoes or cleats, and that to me kind of like speaks to his ability to like overcome that adversity throughout his life, and that obviously plays into the dramatization of this.
Of course, and stories of inspiration and fighting adversity, that's like the best thing you can have in a biopic. And another interesting thing about biopics in general is, it's not good to have one that turns out badly, but it doesn't even have to be a masterpiece. Just to have a record of that somebody made it. I mean, movies live on, is my point. And so just the fact there is a movie called Jim Thorpe, All American, is also the good for Jim Thorpe's legacy. Just that people will stumble upon movies in a way they might not stumble upon a book necessarily, and catch something and go, I've kind of heard of him, but what did he do? Or, and these movies, even if they tend to play with the facts, which most of them do in the interest of telling a story, there's still usually enough there that if you're interested, you can go beyond and learn a lot more about these people.
That's fantastic. That's the insight we're paying for here, John. I appreciate you kind of giving us the 101 course here in film appreciation. Is there anything, that you would say about just that era too? People can certainly tune into, the Turner Classic Movies or anything like that and kind of see these films. I mean, does this one stand out from the standpoint of that era and what was going on in cinematography at that time?
Well, I think not so much in the actual techniques of filmmaking, but the 1950s was sort of the golden age of the biopic. They were really going through everybody they could think of because people liked those stories. Often there were the musicals about singers. So like I'll Cry Tomorrow or Love Me or Leave Me and that kind of thing. But there had been an earlier age of the biopic in the 30s, and those were mostly about scientists and inventors, and they were usually played by Paul Muni or Edward G. Robinson, or Greer Garson as Madame Curie in the early 40s. But then in the 50s, there really was this intensity of biopics, and so I think people, for whatever reason, were fascinated in the behind-the-scenes lives of people. I mean, they never really went out of style completely. I'm just saying seemed to be more of them at that point. And people love to, in the excitement of who's going to play someone, of course, which we're dealing with that now with the love it or hate it, with being the Ricardos about who can be Lucy and Desi and all that. So it never really goes away. And it is so personal if it's someone, sometimes in the case of Jim Thorpe, most of the audience wouldn't have known what he sounded like or looked like. So that's to Burt Lancaster's advantage. When it is someone like Lucille Ball or something, the stakes are much, much higher. So actors always have to deal with that and decide what is the risk, in taking these roles on. What is the expectation? Yeah.
And you don't just moonlight there at the theater every Sunday. You actually have put out several books, and you have a new book out too as well. If you wouldn't mind kind of giving us a little bit of background on what you're providing folks there with your love of film.
Yeah, I've been writing books about mostly the classic film era, but often the books come up to the present. I started in 1999, and my 7th book comes out next month, and it's called There Are No Small Parts, and it pays a tribute to 100 outstanding film performances with screen time of 10 minutes or less. So it starts in 1935 with Elsa Lanchester and her 4 minutes as the Bride of Frankenstein. And it goes up to Al Pacino in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for his less than 10 minutes as Leonardo DiCaprio's agent. So it moves chronologically, all kinds of films. Some of the performances are 2 minutes, some are 10, some it's one scene, some it's 4 short scenes spread across. So it's kind of eclectic and there's a lot of variety and all kinds of genres, and it's a lot of fun. It's hardcover and there are color photos, so I'm really excited about its release.
That sounds like a very unique read from the standpoint of like, oh yeah, I remember that role now. It kind of like conjures that memory that you might have like repressed in some way just because it was so quick.
Yeah, and some of the actors are famous doing cameos, but sometimes it's those character people that we always look at the screen and go, that guy from that thing,
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of thing.
The
Some of
Clint
those
Howards
people,
of the world, right?
so it's like It's a Wonderful Life, Gone with the Wind, Singing in the Rain. All those movies are in this book, The Godfather, but not about the stars, about someone who kind of did their thing really well and got out.
and that is the essence of film, right? You need your star, but then you also need that supporting actor or actress to make the full film itself.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about under 10-minute performances. Every movie has them, every movie. So, in putting it together, I try to just first do it from memory, like what stood out just in my mind when I think of the concept. So then I get a big list of my own and then sort of back to all of them. And that's 15 minutes, they're out too long. And just that was good, but not good enough to talk about. And so it was fun. It was fun.
Amazing. John DeLeo, you are a Milford resident. You must love that resurgence Milford's had, with the hospitality and a lot of the things that are happening down there with Milford Hospitality Group and the theater especially, where folks can kind of come and see you every Sunday there. They can find out more at milfordtheater.com, correct?
Great. Yeah. Great.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us here on Pocono Mountains Podcast. Again, we want to, thank you for giving us a little bit of insight into the 1951 film, Jim Thorpe All-American, that we're airing on Pocono Television Network. 3 dates in February, the 6th, the 8th, and the 20th. Of course, the 6th being the premiere at 8 p.m. this coming Sunday, the Sunday before the Super Bowl. And it's sponsored by Mock Trunk Trust Company. We can't thank them enough for doing that. And thank you, John, for coming on Pocono Mountains Podcast.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed it a lot.
Our thanks to John DeLeo for his expertise, sharing his perspective on the biopic Jim Thorpe All-American, airing starting this weekend, February 6th, 8 p.m. The 1951 classic about the legendary Olympian and founder of the NFL, for whom the town of Jim Thorpe is named, is sponsored by Mock Trunk Trust Company. You can watch it on Pocono Television Network. That is on Blue Ridge Cable, that is on Service Electric and RCN cable systems, as well as over-the-air live broadcasting on Digital Channel 2.8 in the Philadelphia market. You can find out more at PoconoTelevision.com.
Jim Thorpe, All-American, the man of bronze who became the greatest athlete of all time.
Jim Thorpe is not only the name of a beautiful small town, the name also invokes the memory of the greatest athlete of all time. Burt Lancaster stars in the dramatization of a true story, The Life of Jim Thorpe, in Jim Thorpe All-American. Presented by the Mock Trunk Trust Company. Watch it on PTN. Watch Jim Thorpe All-American Sunday, February 6th at 8 p.m. or check PoconoTelevision.com for additional showtimes and listings.
We're back. Thanks for listening to Pocono Mountains Podcast. I'm Jim Hamill. We have a Pocono Mountains Podcast Extra. I was fortunate enough to sit down with the grandson of Jim Thorpe, John Thorpe, back in 2019. We included this one way back on episode 1 of the podcast, and it could not be more relevant than now. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Hamill, the Pocono Mountain Visitors Bureau Director of Public Relations, and we are here at the Asa Packer Mansion in downtown Jim Thorpe. Just a beautiful place here in the Pocono Mountains, and I'm joined by athletic royalty. This is John Thorpe to my left. John is the grandson of the great Jim Thorpe, who this town is named after. And John, I want to welcome you here to Pocono Perspectives. Thank you for taking the time, and I want to know, first of all, what is it like to be a descendant of somebody who's known as the greatest athlete of the 20th century?
Well, Jim, I really didn't do anything on purpose. I was just kind of born into it. So it's quite an honor, and I'm extremely honored to be related to Jim Thorpe. He is the world's greatest athlete. He's done more in sport than anybody else has done. So to have that honor and recognition that I get, although undeservingly, I really, again, didn't do much. He wouldn't want to see me hit a golf ball.
Yeah, you are on the daughter's side, correct? Tell me your relation then to Jim Thorpe in particular.
My mom is Charlotte, and we come from the first marriage to Grand Iva. They met in Carlisle. It was an Indian boarding school at the time. And Mom is the middle kid. There was Aunt Gail came first, and then my mom, and then my Aunt Grace. My grandfather also had a son that was firstborn, Jim Jr., and Jim Jr. passed away when he was just 3 years old.
So your grandfather came to be known as somebody who was very proficient in not just one sport or two sports, but it was dozens of sports, wasn't that right?
Pretty much everything, yeah. He was even asked to go on to the PGA Tour. He's the only athlete that competed in baseball, basketball, and football in the same season. A lot of people don't know that he played professional basketball, but indeed he did. He was the first professional athlete to hit a home run and score a touchdown the same season. So he did pretty much everything, and you know, track and field is. He's the only winner of the decathlon and pentathlon. The pentathlon then was 5 events in track and field. Wow. And he won both of those.
That's quite impressive, especially when you understand all the adversity that he faced in life. He had a brother, you said, who passed away, a twin brother at that.
Yeah, Charlie was his twin brother. He passed away when he was just 9 years old. They were in a boarding school in Oklahoma, and my grandpa hated school. He wasn't really a big he didn't like school very much, so he ran away a lot. And one time he ran away and Charlie stayed behind, and pneumonia came through the school and took Uncle Charlie. And that's why one of the things my grandfather thought why he was such an athlete and could compete at the level that he did, he was actually 2 people instead of 1. He had acquired Charlie's spirit, so it made him 2 people competing, and he was able to do a lot more.
All these years later, to have him memorialized here in a beautiful place in the Pocono Mountains, and to see that memorial there where his name is etched in stone, his achievements are touted. How's that feel as a descendant of somebody who was so well known, but for generations now will be so well known?
Man, you know, it's hard not to be proud. I go to the memorial anytime I'm in town, and we smudge. Indians have sage, and we smudge, and every time I'm in town, I go there and smudge Grandpa and thank him and you know, pay my respects and such like that. And to have a town named after him, you know, he would have loved it here. Although he never set foot here, the closest that he came was to Palmerton, and he had done a speech there, a talk. So setting foot here in the actual town of Jim Thorpe, he never did. But everybody had agreed at one time that if he was here, he would have embraced it.
Now, he came through a collegiate career that was prolific as well, Carlisle Indian School. Then he went on to achieve many medals, which you brought with you. Do you want to show us a little bit of that
Sure, I'd love
memorabilia
to.
that you're holding on to now?
This is an original medal when they came back from the 1912 games. They had a ticker tape parade for them in New York City, and the mayor gave that medal to my grandfather. Would you like to? You can see that if you'd like. Then this plaque was given to my mom. It commemorates the 50th anniversary of the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm, Sweden. And there's some writing on the back there that Mom put on there, and you can check that one out too. And then these medals, and Mom glued all the rocks on the box, are duplicates of his AAU medals. When he was kind of reinstated, they gave each of the family members duplicates of his AAU medals. And here are some of those medals. There's a Carlisle medal down there and some from Boston and other collegiate competitions that he competed in.
Boy, and to think of how many more he achieved over his time. And not just that, but the folklore. To have won a race at the 1912 Olympics, right, with shoes after he lost his shoes?
Yeah, somebody stole them. So Pop went digging around. Pop Warner was his coach. And Pop went digging around the trash, and he found a pair that were mismatched. And if you look at pictures from my grandpa in those games, you can see where he actually has on 2 different pairs of socks to make those shoes fit him. So imagine if he had on shoes, proper fitting shoes, who knows, he would have won by even a larger margin.
And you mentioned earlier too, you think your grandfather would have told you that there was not necessarily a specific sport that he loved, it was maybe hunting and fishing?
Yeah, often reporters would ask him, of all the sports that you've done and all the achievements that you've made, they'd ask him what, are your favorite sports. And to their disappointment, he would often reply, hunting and fishing. But his real true love laid in football. He fell in love with the game, and Pop didn't want him to play football. He was the track guy. He was smaller when he got to Carlisle. He was only 115 pounds. He was just a little guy. So when he went to Pop and said, I wanted to play football, Pop was like, no, you're the track guy. You can't. You're not going to do that. Well, Pop changed his mind after he saw some of the things that Grandpa could do.
And he's credited for having helped build what is today the National Football League. Is that right?
He was his first president. Yeah, back in the day, it was the American Professional Football Association, and it was founded in Canton, Ohio, in a car dealership. And there were a few people that got together and had formed the American Professional Football Association, which 2 years later became the NFL. And yeah, he was the first president.
Just to see so much here it makes you think that one man over his lifetime had done so much. What kind of man was he?
He was really quite shy. He didn't like a lot of accolades or people staring at him or patting him on the back. And to Grandpa, he was just doing what came naturally. He was raised on the Sac and Fox reservation in Oklahoma, and athletics were always big in American Indian competitions. They would have different track and field events there on reservations, long jumping and high jumping and such like that, swimming, horseback riding. And to Grandpa, that was just natural. That's what you did when you were a kid. You were outside playing and having fun and competing.
Wow. So historians have told that his parents instilled in him both a passion for being physically fit, not only that, but a love of nature. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, Grandpa would say that if there was ever a chance to be outdoors, that's where he was. When the sun came up, they were outside, and they spent the whole day outside, as opposed to, kids today, they've got social media and their phones and video games and all that sort of thing. Back in those days, they didn't have that. They had horses, and you could go chase jackrabbits around in the field, and that's what Grandpa really liked doing.
Jim Thorpe passed away in the mid-century, but the legacy lives on throughout athletics history and right here in the Pocono Mountains now. So was there anything else that you wanted to mention about your grandfather and his legacy?
I'd like to say that Grandpa's at peace and at rest. I attended a Sundance. It's a Native American ceremony. It's considered the granddaddy of all ceremonies. And during that Sundance, the medicine man, James Gardner, brought me into the sweat lodge with the dancers and had told me that Grandpa made contact with him in the spirit world. And Grandpa told him that I'm at peace and at rest, and I want no more pain created in my name. So with those words being spoken, no matter what anybody has to say, no matter what the Supreme Court or any of the other courts had to say, I knew in my heart that Grandpa was at rest, and this is where he should be. And now that he is here and he's going to stay here, it does everybody a lot of good, and it does Grandpa a lot of good.
Very good. John Thorpe, thank you so much for joining us here on Pocono Perspectives. John Thorpe, the grandson of the great Jim Thorpe, not only America's greatest athlete of the 20th century, but the world's greatest athlete, and the namesake here now for Jim Thorpe in Carbon County, Pocono Mountains. Thank you for joining us on Pocono Perspectives. I'm Jim Hamill. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Jim Thorpe, All-American, the 1951 classic film starring Burt Lancaster from Warner Brothers. PTN presents the film with limited interruption thanks to Mock Chunk Trust Company, starting February 6th at 8 p.m. on PTN. Then again on the following Tuesday, February 8th at 8 p.m. as well. And finally, February 20th at 10 a.m. Check PoconoTelevision.com for where and when you can watch. Thank you so much for listening. Please remember to subscribe to Pocono Mountains Podcast anywhere podcasting is available. Please remember to subscribe to Pocono Mountains Podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Come visit us in the Pocono Mountains. Book your trip today.